We're talking about how do you know if a marriage is worth saving? It's just as big of a decision as when you first decide to get married and you know that the rest of your life is going to be impacted in terms of your quality of life and your health and your happiness. Who you marry is going to determine that. But it's also if you're in a marriage and you're struggling and you're questioning if this is right or not and you're having doubts, this is also an extremely important decision because you have a lot at stake, especially if you have kids or if you have family. It's the idea of, I don't want to stay because it hurts to stay. But also if I think about leaving, that's terrifying. That feels overwhelming. The stakes are so high, and a lot of times people just stay stuck, but then they're also really unhappy and they can't break out of it. And part of it is because they don't have clarity, right? They don't have clarity around, do I just have to settle? Do I just have to put up with this? Or is there something that I can do to improve this? In my experience, not all marriages should be saved, but I also think that way too many marriages end too soon or for the wrong reasons when they could have been saved. So if you're struggling in your marriage, I'm going to share 7 signs that your marriage is worth fighting for, plus 4 red flags that you should consider, and then some questions that you can ask yourself to help you get clarity if you're confused right now. So the first thing that I think shows that your marriage is worth fighting for is if you still care about each other, right? If there's still a basic sense of affection, even if right now there's not a lot of affection, but you know that underlying you have affection for each other, there's a sense of concern, and there is a willingness or desire to make it work, even if it's faint, even if it's not what you feel strongly most days. But if you really check in with yourself and you say, you know what, there is this part of me that still wants to fight for it, that shows that you still care. Also, if you or your partner still feel the pain about the disconnection, you wish it could be different, and the only reason why you're thinking about leaving is because there is this pain and you just don't know how to get past it, that would be a sign that it is worth fighting for. It is worth saving because you care and you wish it was different and you really long for clearing the block to the connection. That's a very good sign. The second thing is that there has to be accountability and a willingness to change. So this doesn't mean that there might not be an execution problem, right? Sometimes people want to change and then they struggle with actually doing it. They have the insights and they're having a hard time bringing that into a new lived experience. But if one or both partners take responsibility for their dynamic and are willing to go first. So both people don't have to do that at the same time. I think that's a misnomer. Most people think that both people have to be equally willing to participate. But if one person, and if the other person who isn't willing doesn't have a precondition, one person can make these changes and say, all right, I'm going to look at my part of the dynamic. I'm going to figure out what I can do differently and open up to personal growth. I'm going to seek information. A lot of people that come into my orbit, you're here because you started Googling, you started reading, you started going onto YouTube, you started looking into how can I make things better for my relationship. So that shows a real openness to personal growth and learning new skills, because a long-standing marriage, especially as our lives are getting longer, longevity is increasing, it takes skills. It's not just love that's going to do it. So if people are willing to grow in that direction, at least one person go first. There's something there. Also, if your conflicts are painful but not contemptuous. So fighting is obviously really common in marriage, especially in strained marriages, but even in good marriages, there can be, a high conflict style as long as the ratio is pretty good. But if the fighting that you're having is not characterized by contempt, if it's not full of hatred for each other, if there's no demeaning behavior, a lot of denigration, degrading comments, stonewalling, emotional abuse, it's still repairable. Also, if you're able to repair after conflict, even if it's not perfect, but you're able to extend an olive branch or accept an olive branch, then it's worth fighting for. Also, a huge green flag in this area is if there has been a history of emotional connection in the relationship, that's a good sign. I mean, some couples never had that. They can still learn to have that, but it's especially to your advantage if you do have a history, if you once had a strong bond, it is possible to rebuild it because you know what it feels like. You have the memory of it, right? That drives you forward because you want to get back to that. It's much more difficult if you never had a taste of it with the person that you're with. Also, if you share core values and life goals, this is definitely in your favor if you want to fight for your marriage. Difference of an interest is fine, right? People have different interests. That's not what I'm talking about. When people talk about compatibility, I think a lot of times they believe they have to share interests in order to be compatible. They want to do the same things at the same time. That's not true. But you do have to have aligned values around family, around integrity, around personal growth, around really like what you are here for and how you want to live your life, whether that's spiritually, whether that's around core beliefs, whether that's just your own moral code or your life's calling. If there's some overlap in those core values and those life dreams, then your marriage is worth fighting for, even if it's hard right now. If the relationship is safe, if there's no ongoing abuse, if there's no physical, financial, nothing like that, no acute mental health conditions that are untreated or infidelity that's chronic and recurring, you might have resentments because of emotional disconnects. You might have felt betrayal in the form of disappointments if there's been breaches in connection over the years. But that's not the same thing, right? You're still safe. And that is working towards you if you're considering fighting for the marriage. And then the final thing is, even if there's a small amount of hope, if you feel 90% ready to give up, but there's still 10% hope, especially when you combine that with action, there's a lot of potential there. So I know that's kind of depressing if you think about, oh, you only need 10% to want to fight for the marriage. But you have to remember, this is just at a certain moment in time. Marriage is long if you do it right, right? And so there's going to be some years where it feels really not that great, where a lot of the times you're in doubt. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to come out the other side. So it really only takes 10%. Obviously, if you're at 100%, I'm out, then you probably aren't even listening to this right now. But if there's that small amount of hope and you have the other protective factors in place around your relationship, then it's definitely worth fighting for if you want to do the work. Now, there are some red flags that indicate that it's not salvageable, and I'm just going to touch on these because I do talk about this elsewhere. What I'm really referring to is these are red flags if no further changes were made. If you just took things at face value right now without any changes and it was like what I'm about to say, then those would be red flags and would work against you. Repeated betrayals or abuse with no change. Obviously, abuse, if that's a precondition as far as I'm concerned. And so it gets a little bit dicey if the person who has an abusive history is willing to work on it and take accountability. But if you're the leaning in spouse and you're trying to fight for the marriage and your spouse that has repeatedly betrayed you or repeatedly abused you historically and is not part of the solution, it's not salvageable. They absolutely would have to be involved. I mean, you could stay, but I wouldn't ever recommend that for anybody. So what you're looking at is not just physical straight up violence, but we're talking about, chronic patterns of gaslighting, manipulation, withholding of information, dishonesty, cheating without remorse, or cheating without the willingness to do what it takes to heal and repair and rebuild trust. So an example would be if your partner has cheated on you repeatedly and they just want you to get over it, but they're not willing to do anything differently to help you with that. That is not something that I would recommend. The second red flag is if one person refuses to self-reflect ever. Like if you've been with somebody for 10 years and they've never apologized, or if they've maybe apologized once that you can remember, that is such a bad sign. That means they're not really willing to take accountability. They are not really looking inward, or maybe they're looking inward, but if they're not willing to share that they're sorry, or they're not willing to express their willingness to take accountability, it's not really sustainable, right? A sporadic apology once every 10 years is not going to cut it. At some point, even though I do say it only takes one to start to turn around your marriage, in the end, it does take two. So if you're doing all the work and you're somebody who's thinking, but if I just do the work myself, I can turn this around, and you've been doing that for a long time and you've cleaned up your side of the street and your partner still refuses to self-reflect and they won't join you in the work, then that's not a good sign, and I wouldn't recommend staying together. A third thing is, and I have not really talked about this a lot before, if you feel dead inside of the relationship, where you feel numb, you've been resentful for so long, maybe you've been traumatized by the relationship, maybe you just feel so past the point of no return, and the only reason you're in the marriage is because you feel guilty or because you feel like you should stay for the children, but just the idea of spending time with your partner or trying to work on it in any way, shape, or form makes you feel nothing or dead or depressed or almost stagnant. That feeling it's like a sign from your nervous system saying that you're overriding what your entire body is telling you. This is not right. I shouldn't be here. And you're mentally trying to force yourself to stay. How that shows up is just depression, really, like flat affect. There's no joy for life because you're in this relationship. That's no way to live, even if there's no abuse. And I guess sometimes people do get to this place when there's a lot of resentment, and that can be cleared when both people are participating. But if you've been through too much and you just know you aren't willing to do that work, then I think that you can listen to what your body is telling you, that this just isn't right for you. Of course, I'm always here to help people clear the resentments, double down, get back to the love underneath all of those feelings that are blocking the love. But sometimes when you just feel like even if I could get to the other side, this is just not my person, right? It's just something that you know that might not look good on paper, but you just know you can't fake it anymore. And I think that sometimes we do have to honor ourselves, because if we don't honor ourselves and our own happiness, then we're really not any good to anybody that we love. Anybody that we're close with in our family, friends, that's something that we won't be able to tap back into. We're not going to be able to give that much. Our cup will not be full. So don't think of it as a selfish decision to honor yourself. If you're really not able to come to the place where you feel like you can love your spouse again, it really is okay. Forgive yourself, look at how you can make peace with that, and recognize that putting yourself first will actually support you in all of your other relationships, which has a ripple out effect into your communities. And then finally, the last red flag is you only stay out of fear, guilt, or duty. And that's because of the kids, right? The finances, the fear of being alone. Maybe you feel like it's not sustainable. These factors matter, right? I'm not saying they don't matter. Absolutely. These are things that you consider when you look at the whole picture. But if that is the only reason, it's not really doing your kids any favor if they have really unhappy parents. It's actually the wellness and the happiness and the health of their parents that determines a child's well-being. So if you can be healthier apart, that's probably going to be good for your children. Where divorce really hurts children is when they are caught in the middle and there's a lot of inappropriate sharing with the child, or one spouse is talking negatively about the other spouse and the child overhears that. That is damaging. But if you can have a healthy separation, if you can have positive communication in the family, that does not have to destroy your child's life. So the questions you can ask yourself are, am I still emotionally invested in this relationship? Do I really want to come out the other side, and am I willing to do the work on that? Do I trust that change is possible even if it hasn't happened yet, or even if I've had a taste of it but it hasn't been sustainable? Are we both willing to do the work at some point? So the caveat to this question is you can ask, would my spouse at some point be ready if I could clean up my side of the street? Usually you have a pretty good sense of that. If I could clean up my side, I believe my spouse would want to join me in the work. The other question you want to ask is, do I feel respected and safe in this relationship? If you can't answer yes to those questions, it's not a good thing for you. And then finally, if things never changed, they never change from how they are right now, would I still choose this relationship? And if you feel like, well, maybe I would, but I'm settling and I'm crossing my own lines, or if you get caught into that tempting loop in your mind where you're like, well, no, but if it only changed a little bit, it would only just change a little bit, then that's not really the purpose of the question, because that's what keeps people staying way too long, is the potential, the hope of change, when really you have to look at, if I'm betraying myself now, but I'm just staying for hope that it could be different, and it's been this way for a really long time, and I've been communicating about it for a really long time, to me, that gives you clarity that it's just not healthy to stay in. I'm here to support marriages. I'm all for trying to get people to work things through and staying together and not breaking up prematurely. But in the end, there sometimes are reasons where people can't stay together, and that's okay. So bottom line is that a marriage is worth saving when you feel respected, when you feel like there's safety, when you feel like there's a sliver of a willingness to grow and one or both of you is willing to do the work. And it's not just about how things are. It's about how could things be different with the right support, with the right structure, with the right mindset, and with the right skills. So the first decision is the marriage worth fighting for? And if the answer is yes, but you're like, but I don't know how, and you want help with that, I welcome you to book a call. It's a free call, and it would be with somebody on my team, and we can just do a deep dive around where are you stuck, what is the prognosis, and where would be the areas that we would want to target right away and get really specific with your dynamics. That's it for today. If you like my content, please take a second and either like this video or subscribe to my channel, or both. That will help us reach the people that really need to hear this stuff.